All right, this segment will be focusing on property where heritage buildings are more than architectural relics that are tangible connections to our history, culture and identity. Yet as cities grow and space become a premium, the questions loom: should we preserve these treasures or redevelop them to meet modern demands? To help us understand better, already on the line is Sulaiman Saheh, Director Research, Rahim & Co. International. I want to say thank you very much, Rahim, for joining me. Firstly, talking about the heritage building, probably in our mind is also progress, or even we can say maintain the heritage. Firstly, what metrics should guide the decision between preserving and redeveloping a heritage building, and how do we weigh cultural significance against economic potential?
Firstly, thank you very much for this opportunity again. On heritage buildings, for us to determine what parameters in deciding the metrics, whether a property or a building should be conserved or preserved, we need to look at the philosophy of why such things are actually needed, or whether they are actually needed in the first place. Right now, more than ever, the society have evolved to be more appreciative of the little things in life, if you like. If you imagine how things were in the past in terms of how society moves and develops itself, at one time people are going towards modernization, building and development equates to physical development more than anything else. But now, in the past few decades, we see that the society, locally as well as internationally, people appreciate the hardware elements, the physical elements, as well as the software elements, the programming or the intrinsic values of what you get. From there, you can see that the elements such as quality of life, well-being, being relatable to your society, and the sense of identity is being appreciated more. With that, then we can appreciate how important heritage is, or significant buildings or sites are for within our society. With that, then the metrics are actually designed. So we actually look at the political aspect, the legal aspect, the economic viability of those redevelopment, cultural aspect, historical significance, all towards nation building and creation of a national identity or a communal or a community identity within a multicultural society. So with that, a site of significance is actually being has to go through the processes of identification and assessment of its historical significance and its heritage, going through Jabatan Warisan Negara, for example, or even the NGOs who are actually proposing them. Then it will be decided whether it is something that is heritage property or heritage building, which should be conserved or even preserved, or even it has to be given some leeway in terms of its execution of preserving, whether it can be enhanced, whether it relates to the national context or relates to the community context. And that's how we would actually create a matrix of assessment in terms of whether a property or a building or a site is actually worthy of being declared as a heritage site.
Quite interesting, as you mentioned earlier on our discussion on preserving or redeveloping a heritage building, where we take into context of balancing between the cultural significance and against economic potential. But you also say that people are also appreciating the hard and even soft elements. And in some cases where redevelopment is chosen, how can developers ensure the essence of the original heritage is not completely lost?
That's where the guidelines, as well as the National Heritage Act and all the state enactments, as well as the multiple guidelines and regulations or parameters are actually being delineated. And it needs to be delineated properly and clearly, where feedbacks are also being gathered from the community. so that you can actually balance whether to preserve or to redevelop. Some of the more commonly talked about heritage sites have been preserved or conserved, being used as a communal or community facilities or public facilities. Things like a museum, for example, or monuments. Those are more towards the benefit of the public at large. But in terms of redevelopment, this is where some areas that are being heritage buildings are being redeveloped or intended to be redeveloped because it's owned by private entities or private owners. For them to actually conserve or preserve, there's cost implication as well. And making sure that such endeavors are being carried out would actually cost them money. So that's why the programs where the government grants are actually being introduced, even through the master plans, even within the national budget. Also, it has been emphasized that heritage preservation is actually being allocated with certain funds. We actually have Malacca and Penang, UNESCO heritage sites. So the development within these areas has to balance between the needs of development per se for commercial viability, vibrancy, and moving forward, as well as the preservation of the character of the site. The benefit of preserving is not entirely non-financial benefit. There is actually financial benefit as well. Things that are being developed with historical significance can be turned into a strong tourist attraction, which then generates more multiplier effect in terms of the economic vibrancy of an area for F&B outlets, for the kind of activities that would actually spur economic growth in an area. So in order to balance between whether to preserve or conserve against redevelopment, it needs to be looked at holistically, whereby the redevelopment of a city would actually move forward with both the physical development of the buildings as well as the conservation of the heritage in this particular site. But the mechanization or the implementation of that can be segregated out. That's where you can actually see certain developments. There's mechanism like transfer of development rights, getting incentives, tax incentives for development, as well as grants and support in executing these kind of developments.
There's a lot of consideration that we have to take a look at and have a deep further on this. And probably about the implication that you mentioned, what are the long-term economy implications of prioritizing preservations over redevelopment, particularly in high-density urban areas?
In any city, we do need to, and the market has started to appreciate open spaces, well-being. Because if we look at the notion of a good city that would actually serve its community and its citizens, it is towards creating an environment that upholds the well-being of the inhabitants. So when we actually balance the developments for this kind of conservation or redevelopment, the areas that can be preserved might have a low density, yes. But this low density does not mean that it doesn't have benefits to the society. The creation of these idiosyncratic or unique experiences would actually give a better sense of community and also for the benefits of the future generations. And this can continue on with the development that can be reallocated in other places. So in terms of town planning and zoning, that becomes a critical point in terms of the overall master plan of a balanced city development.
And we can say, how can policymakers ensure a balanced approach to heritage preservation when faced with pressure from both cultural advocates and even developers?
We need to appreciate all the stakeholders' different angles and interests. And in making such preservation or heritage conservation for certain areas, it is good for the community, yes. But in terms of how do we fund such a development? So the interest of the developers who will actually be looking at how do we actually conserve or make sure that these areas are actually maintained as a heritage site for all the benefits that it actually gives. But it must make commercial sense for the developers because they are actually in the business of property development. That's where the collaboration, the engagement between the different interested parties, giving all angles, as well as strong government support. Strong government support in terms of allowing for initiatives and incentives or even certain grants that are actually given. Grants that are actually given right now are mostly on repairing works, restoring works. These would actually make sure those heritage buildings are actually taken care of. It doesn't deteriorate further. It will still be enjoyed by the communities of the future. Yes. But how do we fund those developments? And that's where the balance with the redevelopment, when the redevelopment rights that has some commercial sense, would actually make it a win-win partnership. But at the same time, the guideline in terms of how those are to be executed must be cast in a very transparent and effective manner. Because if not, the redevelopment could have just to maintain a particular facade, but the rest of the content is all lost. There's certain developments where you can actually preserve more than just the facade. You can actually preserve certain sections. Of course, technology comes into play over here because in certain areas, in certain globally, people do actually look at literally pulling up a particular house and relocate at another location. And the building is actually, the redevelopment is done surrounding or enveloping that particular building, having that architectural significance or historic feature in the center as a central focus point for the new development.
All right, again, I want to say thank you very much to Sulaiman Saheh, Director of Research, Rahim & Co. International, Sudan Berhad. As we can see from early to end of the discussion, talking about the heritage building, it's either preserve or progress. Definitely, all the approach that Malaysia needs to be very careful and holistically talking about preservation of heritage. Again, I want to say thank you very much, Sulaiman Saheh, and definitely all of our discussion here will be featured in Astro, AWANI.com. And right up next, with our colleagues Ibrahim Sani, will be taking over the next segment, and Niaga AWANI will be taking a short break as well, and we'll be right back.